All right, I want to make sure we understand that the cycles, the seven sevens of Revelation, is making the story progress, even as it is just telling the same story again and again, right? And it is progressing in the sense of what each cycle wants to talk about most, right? So, for example, let's think about how it's progressed. None of it really wants to talk very long about part one. Because when John writes Revelation, this is the only part that is fully past tense, right? So they're somewhere around here in the story. So they don't want to elaborate long on that. But what we see is the first part of the first of the sevens, the seven churches. We have a very zoomed in, gritty view of this part of some churches in the midst of part two, right? So we have a zoomed in, this is what this particular church is struggling with, and this particular church is struggling with, and the next one, and so on. And then when we get to the second set of sevens, the seals, it is really interested in part two, but now we have a big picture of what is the deal with this whole part two of the story, right? And it talks very little. The other areas it's not as interested in, so it compresses it into very few words. But number two is what it really wants to talk about. So in the seven seals, we've got it expanded into a lot of words, a lot of explanation, right? Then, when we moved on to the seven trumpets, what we saw is sort of it is split in its emphasis between 2 and 3. We saw like the first 4 trumpets, very interested in this area, and then the trumpet 5 and 6 was interested in 3. So the emphasis is more progressed over to here. But then when we got to this last one we talked about, the epic 7 visions of the climactic battle between the serpent and the seed of the woman, now it wasn't really worried about too much. It talked about 1, it talked about 2, but what it really wanted to get to was part 3. And this little part 3 got really zoomed out and expanded, and we looked closely on that. And then what we're going to find when we go to the bowls of wrath, we have the bowls of wrath and the 7 visions of victory, and they're both kind of on part 4 of the story. Their focus is there, but the bowls of wrath, which is next, kind of focuses on this half of it, the final pouring out of God's wrath. And then on the 7 visions of victory, we're still focusing on part 4, but we're kind of on this side of it. And we see 7, it's sort of like here we see the bombs drop, and then here we get a tour of what it accomplished, right? And so we see things like the prostitute and what her fate was, and the beast and what his fate was, and the marriage supper of the Lamb on this side of the victory, right? And then finally, in the last cycle, which begins in Revelation 20, the focus is on 5, and everything else is squinched down really small, but 5, but the final things he's really interested in. So what we see is that Revelation, as it goes through these 7 sevens, it really is actually advancing the story, but it's doing it while starting over again and again and focusing more on different parts. There is one way I can help you think about this. If you're willing to watch a movie, go watch the movie Vantage Point. And I believe Dennis Quaid is one of the actors in that. I can't remember. It's been so long since I watched it. But this is what the movie Vantage Point does. It keeps telling the same timeline, and then all of a sudden you're back at the start of the morning and you see the same period of time from another person's perspective, and then you see it from another person's perspective, and then maybe you're seeing this part of the timeline from the first person's, and it keeps repeating the same moments of time, but at the same time, it keeps advancing the story by what it zooms in on and what it shows you, right? So if you want to understand a little bit better of the literary strategy of the book of Revelation, that movie might help you out.